liver transplantation is a very hot topic for the general public and clinicians alike because our donor supply is very limited, and there are many patients waiting for liver transplantation, but there are just not as many livers to go around. And the other factor about the donor livers is that not all donor livers are created equal. Some donor organs function better than the others. And there have been studies in the past where the investigators try to determine what are the factors that can predict how well a given donor organ is going to function as a liver transplant. And one of the factors that they found was the race of the donor. And the gist of the conclusions of their work was that if an organ is from somebody who is not Caucasian, then the outcome of the transplant was not as good. Race in medicine may mean different things. It could be that because of different race, you may have different biology. For example, if you transplant an organ from a different race person to a different recipient, then there may be some immunologic differences that may make the organ work less well than donor and recipient matching of the same race. On the other hand, race could be a surrogate marker of other socioeconomic factors or something else than what is purely biological. So we wanted to investigate whether donor race is something that has fundamental biological connotation, or is it something else that donor race is just a marker of. So that was our project. So we looked at the national organ data from Organ Procurement and Transplantation Network. And we basically have data of all the transplants that occurred during the study period, which was 2003 to 2005. And there were tens of thousands of observations, including the database. And we looked at white donors, we looked at African American donors, and Asia Pacific Island donors, and the rest. And most of these individuals were of Hispanic ethnicity. So those were the 4 categories that we looked at. And if we just looked at the race superficially, then yes, indeed, if you're a non-white person, then the donor, the outcome of the transplant, the graft, did not do as well as a white person's graft. But when we dug a little bit deeper and looked at, for example, for the African American race, we looked at where the transplant occurred and considered that in the analysis, then the African American race went away, meaning that African American donors were collected at centers that didn't have as good an outcome as in an area where white donors are prevalent. So if you just link the 2 factors on a superficial level, it looks like African American race is a bad thing as an organ donor, but in fact it's not that the race is important, but where the transplant occurred. It happened to be that African American donors were transplanted in centers where the outcome was not as good. For the Asia Pacific Islanders, if you just look at that superficially again, the outcome was not as good. But one thing about liver transplant is that if the donor liver size is not consistent with the recipient liver size, so if you give a too small a liver to a larger person, then the outcome is not as good just because you're not getting sufficient amount of liver tissue. And Asian people tend to have smaller body size. So if you don't adjust for the fact that the liver is a smaller organ, then it will appear as though Asian livers are not as good as, for example, white livers. But when we adjust it for the body size, most of the Asia Pacific effect went away. So the lesson that we learned from these exercises is that if you dug deeper, then there's a true reason that emerges that explains why race may appear as an important factor in donor determination, but it is not the race itself, it's something else that coexists with the race factor.